And remember that clickers are channel 41. Okay. So today we're going to do empirical distributions. Okay, but first, a little clicker quiz. Okay, one more minute. If you want to change your answer, on average it'll be better. There you go. You can see in real time. All right, and done. So, what's the right answer? What? C. Fantastic. 99% of life in the oceans. Less severe extinction on land, but still a pretty huge extinction. Okay. Next question. What is a clade? And choose the best answer. So the two answers that are okay, but one is much better than the other. It's more precise. Okay, 1 more minute. And the correct answer is D. So yes, they relate to each other, but I mean, any group of organisms that relate to each other, right? So this is much more precise definition. Good. All right. So learning objectives for today. Okay. So macroevolution is a process, right? And we're going to be spending the semester learning about this process. First, we'll look at what patterns it's trying to describe. Okay, so what's out there that we have to be able to understand with evolutionary processes. Okay, so we're trying to get at today. All right, so what's this showing us? Yes. What does that mean? Well, like, what are the results of this map? Yep, exactly. So, immersed in the tropics, right? This is a major pattern of macroevolution, of life, and it's a very big question trying to explain why is there more diversity in the tropics? What are some ideas? Why does it make more species? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it makes it easier to survive here, right? So to be really well adapted to the climates here, anything can survive here. Right? So you can't go this way, you can't go this way. That's one hypothesis. What's another? Okay. Yeah, so it's this idea by Dan Jansen, mountains are higher in the tropics, right? Which is actually not actually about elevations, they feel higher. Right, so if you have something that's living in the Smokies, right? It's living here. Well, sometimes the year is cold, sometimes it's hot. There's a lot of variation in temperature, right? So it could go, up this way, and it's just with variation. Like the variation between here and here is about the same variation that occurs over here, right? If you have something that's living in the tropics, it might have very little variation over the year. and so it might be less adaptive to variation. So it couldn't, go uphill by, 2,000 feet. There's one time something from anything to the idea that that same height of barrier in the tropics is much different barrier to electrical species. Good. What else? Yep. I'll show you. There's a great cartoon the other day of Boston, buildings in Boston, and then the height of the ice sheet. So there were great glaciers all through here that were a mile high. These were huge things, right? So you don't have oak trees surviving glacier ice cream. And so just wiped out all life that could survive on top of ice. Right over here, we've been happily evolving along for a long time. What else?
Something along the lines of
Something like that. And oftentimes, so with a lot of these diversification arguments, there's often this sort of bad coupling between it's a good thing and there are more species. So it's better to have more offspring, right? Clearly, how does that lead to more species? And maybe have more dispersal and these various maybe things, but you often see it's it's better if you have latex canals because then insects don't eat you as much. Right? Cool. Why don't we eat some more species? It's like I thought the Martha Stewart theory. It's a good thing. But it could be just actually what it does is lead to lower extinction rates. Lower extinction rates are rare. That's something that macroevolution isn't really doing a good job with yet. I think is linking adaptive traits to actually higher diversification rates. But that's one example of something proposed. Good. What else? The various ideas proposed just about why there might be higher speciation or lower extinction in the tropics. So sort of the mountain theory, causes higher speciation rates, things that cause lower extinction rates. And there's various ideas for this too. So good. So you have all these hypotheses about why we have so much diversity in the tropics, and it's the role of macroevolution to go and figure out which one is correct. And of course, it being biology, it's probably not going to be just that theory. Right? It's probably going to be it's a mixture of this for these groups and this for these groups and both of these for this other group. Right? That's what you do with macroevolution. Good. Okay, now click a question. And note, this one is 2 points for any answer. So, I'm 15 minutes ahead of time. By species, sorry. Good, yeah, good question. Okay, everyone's answered. Survey says about 50%. Okay. So when you think about all the diversity in life, all the work done on flowering plants, non-flowering plants, and vertebrates, and then insects. Right? So why are there so many insects? Okay. That's an interesting question. Right. Any hypotheses about that? A lot of what? Yeah, I mean, so small body size allows for if a given amount of resource going in, you can have more individuals, right? So you have bigger population sizes, which can lead to better natural selection, like more effective natural selection. One thing. Well, other forces, yeah. I mean, acts with the same. Well,
Physical forces.
yeah, yeah. I mean, see an ant picking up a water droplet and carrying it around. So. Yep. Good. Yeah. What else? Okay. Right. And as we saw last time with the plants, right? Short generational times lead to faster evolution. Right? Which if speciation is limited by some sort of mutational process or something, maybe it's faster that way. Good. What else? Yeah. So remember we talked about speciation being primarily allopatric, right? So, for a blue whale can call across an ocean and say, hey, who wants to mate with me, right? An insect doesn't do that. Their insects are separated. There's lava flows in Hawaii that went down and occasionally missed some forest around the forest. And it's thought that, insects in different little patches of forest are separated and don't cross this burning hot lava, field of, not hot lava anymore, but it gets hot in the sun to go mate with others, right? So there's isolation at a small distance, even though, you could just get up, walk over. Right? So good. So faster allopatric. What's another idea? Right, specialization. And so you can have, one species adapt just to this fruit, one species adapt just to this fruit. Okay. There's also adaptation through hyperparasitism. Okay, so if you find, an aphid on a leaf, there's a good chance that they have inside them a parasitoid block. And actually, there are other parasitoids that are parasitoids of parasitoids. And so inside this one would be new one. Okay, so you have this incredible diversity of parasitism. So even though you have, let's say, one aphid species on the plant, you might also have one parasite on that aphid, one hyperparasite on that. So you get these levels. Good. Oh, life is weird. Okay. So what's this showing? One reason we have to interpret these graphs is because one of our overall programmatic objectives for EEB is having you guys understand how to read graphs. So voila. What's this graph show? Yep, so it's bigger than tropics, right? So this is sort of a weird, this is sort of a bad way of doing plotting because the actual cool thing is this. Right? It's showing the data. But, right, so here we see things that are bin histograms, right? So how many things are 1 meters high, 1 meters high, 1 meter high. And we see in the tropics, we have, things, that we have so we use this trend. Know that these data also exclude things like plants, right? So if you walk it on a tree, how high is the orchid? No, it doesn't relate. Right. So why might this be? Right. And so, there's more sunlight on average in the tropics. Right? And so what determines tree height? Well, it's using energy to convert carbon from the air into wood. Right? So perhaps it's their energy. That'd be another idea. the range they can grow, right? So it could be, but not all tropics, but in many tropics there's a lot of rainfall. So it could be that there's better growing conditions because there's better climate for the plants. You can get taller. Like what else? Okay. Okay. Cool. I know that. That's the soil factors. What else? It varies. There are some deciduous ones in the tropics, but yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, if here's where it could be combination effects, because that might be true in the tropics, but then here we have deciduous forests, we get freedom of the conifers that are prohibited. So it is true for the deciduous plants, and then conifers are sort of weird exception. Yeah. Another idea is freezing, right? So why don't we have palm trees growing natively in Tennessee? Cool like LA. Wow. Also, because palms don't do well with freezing. As you have, how do trees bring up water? They have these, conduits that carry water up inside them, right? And if they have bubbles inside, you break the water column, and you can't bring water up, and so all the leaves stemming from that tube don't get water. Okay, and so a lot of the trees we have here are adapted to freezing by either dropping their leaves, so if you carry water up as freezing, or have other devices that allow them to bypass bubbles and things like that. But a lot of plants don't have that, and so they can't get far north or far south because of freezing. Good. You can see how for each of these patterns, we can think of many different processes, and then what your job is to go and figure out why that is. So, for example, we're working on a paper now to look at its freezing tolerance and see if that explains why it works. Okay, so here we see a pattern of body mass for birds and mammals. Okay, and we see a pretty similar shape. Right? So we have some few big ones, a lot of fairly small ones, and a few really tiny ones. Right? Why might we have this pattern? Mm-hmm. Is it smaller ones? Actually, it's the reverse. Yep. So your volume increases like the cube of your area, of your size, but your surface area increases by the square, right? And so when you think of like the 2D analog, if this has size 1, its its internal area is 1. This has size 5, its internal length 5, internal area is 25. Right, so we have 25 to 5 over 1 to 1. Okay, and since you generate heat internally with your mass, this generates a lot more heat to losing it. And you lose it over your surface, and so this is easier to stay warmer. Which is why small mammals like shrews are always eating. They're just burning through calories to stay warm. Actually, hummingbirds at night sort of lower their body temp so they have to keep burning as much heat to keep it going. Okay, whereas large mammals have to devote a lot less energy just staying warm. Yeah, so that could actually explain this tail. I'll do the tail. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. You might have so much territory that you have the population size gets really small. You're subject to random extinction events because of small population size. Okay. Yeah. What else? What could also be sort of scaling effects, right? So in the same way that your volume increases by your cube, so like your bone strength is based on the cross-sectional area of your bone. Right? So as you get bigger and bigger, you have to get thicker and become bigger and bigger bone, basically. Right? And so you have to be very small and gracile if you're small, but at some point it becomes too costly to have huge bones to support the mass. Right? That'd be another cost. Okay. And actually, this is from a very cool paper that basically fits just one parameter, and from that can predict pretty much curves like this based on the regular trend in increasing body size when you get to 2 minutes, but also higher extinction risk in body size, and so the minimum size. So you usually live away from this minimum, and then you keep increasing, but then the high end start going extinct. So it leads to this equilibrium. The idea, of course, would be non-equilibrium, right? So if mammals started off being small at the KT, right, and then now they can expand, maybe this front keeps expanding. Right, so we've gotten big yet. It's a possibility. And you could test for this using phylogenic methods. Your question? Another example, another data point to explain is distributions of taxa. Right? So we have fossils of billion in South America and Africa. Right? We have fossils of this fern all over all these continents. Right? Until continental drift, people didn't know what was going on with that. Right? They thought maybe there's land bridges allowed them to cross over, and that sort of thing. But it was watching these really crazy land bridges connecting places. Right, and now we know it's continental drift, and so there used to be one continent long enough, right? And then just block over, they would break up. Another example. So this is going to be a pretty common fossil. Okay, this plant. From it's extinct, very interesting. We found some actually living examples. We have a couple on campus. They've been introduced. Okay. So here's something that seemed to be extinct, and then 10 million years later, we found new examples that haven't changed much. Okay. So the question is, okay, evolution's happening all the time, right? Why haven't they changed? Why might they be sort of the same phenotype as before? Say it again. Mm-hmm. All right. So one hypothesis is that evolution is fueled by variation in population. If you go through a bottleneck, there might not be variation. It might take a while for it to accumulate. So they just haven't had the ability to develop it, and they lack the raw fuel. How can we test that? Mm-hmm. Right. So we can do things like climate models and see where things occur now and where they could have occurred. It could be they were stuck in one small little region. Yeah, that's one way to test it. It's another way to test it. You want to hear how the genetics class? Okay? Right, so yeah, exactly. So with the genetics, and figure out from that, using like coalescent approaches or other approaches, figure out what size of population they've had in the past. And you can use that to say, okay, it would look obviously resemble the body. There's actually another way people do it. Before there was people who could do genetics easily. It won't work for trees, but for animals that do skin grafts. And so if things are really similar, you can move skin from one to another and it won't be rejected. And so like cheetahs, you can graft skin from one cheetah to any other cheetah and it won't reject it. It's so similar that it doesn't see it as separate. So, oh, there's more of my skin. Cool. Kind of interesting. But yeah, plants graft more easily than that. It's not a good test for that. Okay, another pattern we see a lot is these various trend patterns, which we'll come back to in a little while. Here's one of them, Cope's rule. Okay, and Cope's rule is this trend of things to get bigger through time. Why might they do that? Yep, that's good. It's more efficient to be bigger. Good. What else? Yeah, I don't know about that. That's interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, which brings up an interesting point. It's always good to think about plasticity with all this too. And some of this is, evolutionary heritable change. Some of it's just it could be different environments. Right? So if we're looking at this and it was just in the context of a warming climate, it was just they're bigger and warmer. In this case, it's not, but yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, it's like predation risk and also dispersal. Good. Yeah. And also interest of competition for mates or whatever. Right? If there's male-male competition, maybe the bigger male does better. And so his offspring will inherit those bigger genes and so forth. Good. What might set against bigger size? We talked a little bit about this already, right? So range size and things like that. Structural constraints. Good. Yeah, you see that was a pattern on islands. So until fairly recently, there were actually, not in written human history, but before that, a population of tiny mammoths that were stuck on an island and shrunk down. Because it could reproduce at smaller size, would do better, have more offspring. So, best thing to clone for pets. All right, so here's some examples of things in nature that we have to explain. Okay. So, here we see a fish, barracuda, fish that eats small fish. And here we see fish going inside its mouth willingly, right? And we see they're not very picky about this. Right? So obviously we know the story that these fish are getting benefit by cleaning up parasites, whereas the big fish are getting clean. The little small fish are getting a meal, right? So that's a fine story. But then also we have a question of why isn't someone cheat? Right. So in all these sort of interactions, Like, okay, I'm inside and I'm grazing on you, but oh, I see a little nice, tasty bit of flesh on you too. Let's take a little nibble there. Like, okay, I'm pretty much done being cleaned. Now let me just, eat the cleaning fish too. Right? So, why doesn't that happen? Or does it happen? Hmm? Yep. Yep. Right. So, breaking the rules of playing well with each other is a cheater strategy. Yep. And actually, there are fish that mimic cleaner rats that actually just bite the host fish rather than actually clean it. Okay. So, like, who's with me? And so when we get to game theory later on, we'll talk about how situations like this evolve and what keeps cheating from evading. Okay. So here's an anglerfish, right? The ones that have the light thing and they look very tasty. Fish come and play, right? And males, males. Right? So, in general nature, what affects size dimorphism? Right? So gorillas, males are larger. Anglerfish, males are smaller. What leads to this? Anglerfish males basically just big set of nostrils to smell females, and there's enough motility to get over to them. That's it. Bite on. Actually, their bloodstreams fuse. It just becomes basically a sex organ attached to the female. Okay, so how did that evolve? Right. What are the consequences of that? Okay. So here's a fish. Yeah. Well, fish goes to play. So here's a bird walking in the forest saying, "Eat me, eat me." Right? So why is it doing that? Well, obviously it's sexual selection. Right? So what affects how extreme sexual selection can get? How is it counteracted? Okay, here's a bird with claws on its wings. Okay, so here's it hanging. So how'd you figure out if this has retained claws from Archaeopteryx or has re-evolved them? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It could be that, what evolved was it retained claws and this evolved the new trait of dropping them as adults. How do you rule that out? Well, let's get it in here. Oh, what do you mean? Right, so we have a tree. And we find that the oats and the claws is right here, right? And everything else around it has lost claws. It doesn't have claws. This suggests that it's a re-evolution of claws rather than retention. Whereas if we had what's in here, and Archaeopteryx and the bird's claws here, you might say, well, here's the camera claws from that. But since it's not so far up here, we know that it's not. At least we can infer that it's not. Okay. Here's a great example of the predictive power of evolution. Right, so here's a flower, and this huge nectar spur. Okay. And this is a famous example from Darwin. So he found this flower, this huge nectar spur, and there were no insects that could the tongue long enough to reach into it. And Darwin said, you will find a hawk moth has a tongue that long. And it took many, many years people finally found the hawk moth. It's called something predictable. And so here you can see we have this coevolutionary process. And so first of all, we can use it to make predictions about life. Well, we start to wonder, why waste all this energy building this really long tube? Right? Other orchids do just fine in small tubes. That could be an explanation. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So not all with pollen, you need to move the pollen right to the stigma, right? And so some things are cheap. With orchids, they have no linear, so structure that holds pollen, and really stick onto the insect, and so you can see, which flowers into the insect is visible, how like here and one step here and so forth, and so. To choose your pollinator, be the precise pollinator, would help in terms of getting the right pollen and a good seed set, and also not preventing breeding from other related species where you're often going to do as well. And so these long pollen tube, nectar spur, it prevents other pollinators from pollinating. Okay. And of course, we went about leafcutter ants, right? And how do they evolve to some extent fungi? Right? They start off by eating leaves themselves, and start to eat some of the fungi that's growing the leaves, and start farming the fungi themselves. They find fungi that are already eating leaves and just ate those fungi. And how does this evolve? Okay, here's a very interesting example. So you have to split those playing sort of weird behavior in nature. So here's a hippo and here's a lion. Right, and here's the carcass. Okay, and let's see what happens. Okay, so the hippo scared away the lion and started eating the dead animal. Okay. Hippos are vegetarians. What's going on here? Well, it relates to sort of also evo-devo. So it's very easy to process meat. Okay, evolutionarily, meat's easy to digest, whereas plants are much harder to digest. Right? So pity the poor panda that it still has a short digestive tract, even though it eats bamboo all the time. Right? And so it's easier for a hippo to start switching to eat meat, and meat has high protein and all those nice things, whereas plants are hard to digest. So if we can opportunistically get some meat, it might do better. That's what I'm doing there. Okay, and so this is the thing. I mean, could hippos become, scavengers? Like right now, we know only male hippos do this. They collect males. Maybe when we give enough time, other hippos start doing this, right? Maybe then to become predators. So, another pattern I have to explain with macroevolution is this adaptive radiation. Right. So we had one finch with Galapagos Islands, and then diversify into other forms. Some of them, pick up insects. Some of them get a cactus spike and sort of dig into trees and nap. So trees, some birds, some crush seeds. Right, so how do we get this radiation of species? Another pattern to explain are ring species. Okay, so here we have salamanders in California. They don't occur in the valley. They occur around here. And so, they can all interbreed with each other. Look at here. Okay, so are they one species or two species? Or many species? And how does this sort of evolve? How can you evolve, gene flow throughout, not across the tips? In question in speciation. One examples is convergence. Okay, so we have here marsupial mammals and apiarian mammals, and we have, flying squirrel analog, mole analog, mouse analog. It's fully evolved. Okay. And so what would be explanation for convergence like this? Right, so just like we saw with dolphins and ichthyosaurs, right? If there's an adaptive phenotype, you could have convergent evolution towards it, right? The cool thing here is that, there's enough evolutionary potential to, re-evolve gliding, things like that. And so not only are the conditions equivalent, we also have the ability to mutate and then have selection towards that same goal. Right? Kind of think about like how much of evolution is mutation limited versus selection limited. Okay. Another thing to explain is alternate food webs, right? So we all know sunlight and plants grow, and animals eat plants and animals eat the animals, and try to avoid everything, right? And here we have chemosynthesis happening, right? Where they might get some minor subsidy from the surface, but most of their nutrition comes from bacteria that can process the radioactive chemicals coming out of these vents. Okay, and so you might ask, which evolved first, chemosynthesis or photosynthesis? Right? How do you answer that? I have to explain that more. Yeah, you're talking about those sort of chemical fossils, right? So the trace of ones that are chemosynthetic could be different than ones of those that are photosynthetic. And so we can look back in early rocks and see which one is more common. It's another way to do it. You can never go wrong in this class by answering the phylogeny. Right? So if we do analysis and reconstruct, we have like photosynthetic and chemosynthetic, we find that chemosynthetic is the ancestral state. That's just evidence for it. What could be a problem with this thing? What could lead astray? Yeah. So what if the only photosynthetic things sampled were flowering plants? Right? And they say, okay, photosynthesis evolved very recently because flowering plants aren't that old. Right? And we've missed everything else. And so, of course, we'd want to compare some of the extra stuff, but there's extinct stuff we just can't include at all. And so that could throw off our analysis. Okay. So these are all examples of the patterns out in nature that macroevolution seeks to explain. Okay? And what we're going to do the rest of the semester is walk through and learn about the processes of speciation and extinction, causes trends, and that sort of thing that can explain these patterns. Okay? Are there any questions about this? Yeah. Yep. I don't know. Sounds like a research project to me. Yeah, I mean, hippos kill more people than lions do. So, don't mess with that. Imagine it'd be hard to eat people because there's a lot of bone, like, but let's get something like that. Other questions? All right. I will see you on Wednesday in Dabney. If you go there and I'm not there, make sure I'm not over here.